The champagne bubbles felt like tiny needles against my tongue, a stark contrast to the sticky sweetness that coated everything else. The air in the reception hall was thick with perfume and forced smiles, the kind you wear when you haven't seen family in years, but remember why you don't see them often enough. My cousin, radiant and oblivious, laughed across the room, a white blur of happiness I suddenly envied with a ferocity that stole my breath. And then I heard him, standing by the bar, his back mostly to me, chatting with Uncle Robert, his voice carried just loud enough over the generic wedding band playing some upbeat, forgettable tune. He was laughing too, the easy, charming sound that had first drawn me in, the sound that now felt like a punch to the gut. "Oh, he was saying, a casual wave of his hand dismissing years of shared history. "This is just the first wife." The phrase hung in the air, shattering the festive noise. Just the first wife. Like a rental car, a draft pick, a stepping stone. My hand froze halfway to my mouth with the champagne glass. The smile I'd plastered on my face felt suddenly brittle, about to crack and shatter like the glass I gripped too tightly. The lights seemed to dim, the music receded, leaving only the echoing clarity of those 4 words. He turned then, as if sensing my stillness. His eyes met mine across the room. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in them. Not regret, not guilt, but a strange sort of defiant acknowledgement. He'd meant for me to hear it. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a declaration. He held my gaze for another beat, that same unsettling flicker in his eyes, a silent dare. And then he smiled. Not the charming smile, but a tight, cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. He turned back to Uncle Robert, resuming the conversation about golf or the stock market, completely oblivious to the fact he had just detonated a bomb in the middle of a wedding. The champagne glass felt impossibly heavy. My fingers ached. My throat was suddenly dry. I couldn't breathe. The noise of the reception rushed back in, overwhelming my senses, yet I felt utterly detached, floating outside my own body, watching the woman in the blue dress with the frozen smile as her world imploded. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, it helps me more than you know. Before those words, before that moment, life had been quiet, predictable, comfortably numb, perhaps. 7 years of marriage. 7 years of waking up next to the same person, sharing coffee, navigating commutes, paying bills, choosing paint colors, attending obligatory family functions just like this one. It wasn't a fairy tale, not by a long shot, but it was ours. Or so I thought. It was a life built piece by careful piece, brick by mundane brick. We met in college. Young, hopeful, full of plans. He was ambitious, driven, always looking for the next opportunity. I was supportive. I believed in him. I saw the fire in his belly, the spark in his eyes, and I wanted to be part of that journey. I pictured us growing old together, maybe with a couple of kids, a house with a garden, quiet evenings on the porch. Simple dreams, perhaps, but they felt real. They felt achievable. The early years were good. Or maybe they were just busy. Building careers, saving money. The usual young couple hustle. There were arguments, sure, the usual bumps in the road. Stress about finances, disagreements about future plans, minor irritations that you gloss over because you're building something together, something bigger than the small frustrations. There was laughter, too. Shared jokes, spontaneous weekend trips, the comfort of his presence beside me in the quiet moments. He was my partner, my confidant, my best friend. Over time, though, the edges started to blur. The spontaneous trips became fewer. The shared jokes felt rehearsed. The quiet moments grew heavy with unspoken things. His ambition hadn't waned, but it felt like it had shifted focus. It wasn't about building our future anymore. It was about his career, his connections, his success. I was still there, a constant presence, providing the stability, the home life, the supportive wife figure expected of him. But I started to feel less like a partner walking beside him and more like a fixture in the background of his increasingly bright, increasingly separate life. I tried to talk about it. tried to bridge the growing distance. "Are you okay?" I'd ask, sitting across from him at the dinner table, the untouched food growing cold between us. "You seem distant." He'd sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just stressed, you know? Work is crazy. Big deal coming up." And I'd accept it. Because that's what you do, right? You give the benefit of the doubt. You understand that work is demanding, that life gets complicated. You tell yourself it's just a phase, a busy period, and things will go back to normal. The normal I clung to felt increasingly fragile, built on a foundation that was slowly, invisibly, eroding. He started working late more often. Business trips became more frequent, sometimes extending an extra day with vague explanations about follow-up meetings. He became more secretive with his phone, always placing it face down, quick to end calls if I entered the room. Little things, red flags I saw but chose to interpret as harmless, as quirks of a busy man, as paranoia on my part. It's easier to doubt yourself than to face the possibility that the person you've built your life with is actively dismantling it. The wedding, my cousin Sarah's wedding, felt like a forced return to normalcy. A family gathering, a reason to dress up, to smile, to pretend everything was fine. He seemed in good spirits that morning, maybe a little too good. An artificial brightness that I, in my desperate hope for things to be okay, mistook for genuine happiness. We drove together, the silence in the car feeling familiar, but heavier than usual. I talked about Sarah, about how excited I was for her, about the dress I was wearing. He mostly nodded, his eyes on the road, a small, unreadable smile playing on his lips. Looking back, I realized he was probably already living in that future he mentioned. A future without me. And then came the words. "Just the first wife," spoken with a casual cruelty that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't anger, wasn't a fight. It was worse. It was dismissal. It was planning. It was the quiet confidence of a man who had already moved on and was simply waiting for the convenient time to inform the person he was leaving behind. The rest of the wedding was a blur of performance. My smile was glued on. My laughter sounded brittle and fake. Every conversation felt like an interrogation, even when nobody asked anything. Did they know? Could they see it in my eyes? Did Uncle Robert, who had been standing right there, understand the casual devastation of that phrase? I avoided my husband, glanced at him from across the room. He was talking, laughing, drinking, the picture of a man without a care in the world, a man free from the future he'd just annihilated. I felt like I was drowning in plain sight, surrounded by people celebrating love and commitment, while my own crumbled into dust. My cousin's happiness was a cruel counterpoint to my despair. Every song, every dance, every clinking of glasses felt like a mockery. I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear. Instead, I stood there, rooted to the spot, a statue of a wife, just the first one. The drive home was long and silent. The silence wasn't comfortable anymore. It was a chasm. The car felt like a tomb. The streetlights blurred into streaks of light as we sped past, each one a tiny, distant star in a universe that had suddenly become cold and empty. I stared out the window, watching the world go by, feeling utterly disconnected from it. He didn't speak, didn't apologize, didn't explain. His silence was louder than any shouting match could have been. It confirmed everything. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a joke. It was his truth. I was just the first wife, the placeholder, the stepping stone. My mind replayed his words, his smile, his eyes meeting mine. The coldness. The calculation. How long had this been going on? Who was the next wife? Was she here tonight? Had I shaken her hand, smiled at her, unknowingly acknowledging her place in his future? The questions swirled in my head, a nauseating storm of doubt and betrayal. We got home. The house was dark and quiet, unwelcoming. It felt different. Not our home anymore, but a place we merely cohabited until he decided to leave. I went upstairs, went through the motions of getting ready for bed. He stayed downstairs for a long time. I didn't ask what he was doing. I didn't care. All I felt was a profound, bone-deep weariness. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the the empty space beside me a physical manifestation of the distance between us. Tears came eventually, silent, hot trails down my temples into my hair. Not violent sobbing, just a quiet, steady flow of grief. Grief for the marriage, for the future I'd believed in, for the person I thought he was, for the person I thought I was in this life. The next few days were a blur of forced normalcy during the day, going to work, talking to colleagues, buying groceries, and silent agony at night. He acted as if nothing had happened, went through his routine, came and went, polite but distant. I walked on eggshells, waiting for him to say something, to break the silence, to confirm the end. But he didn't. He just existed in the house, a ghost of the man I knew, a constant reminder of the casual cruelty he was capable of. I didn't confront him immediately. Part of me was paralyzed by fear, fear of the confirmation, fear of the conversation, fear of the unknown future. Part of me was trying to understand, to process. How could someone do that? Say something so devastating, so dismissive, in public, and then act like it meant nothing? Was I supposed to pretend I hadn't heard? Was that the game? I started noticing more things. Small details I'd previously dismissed. The way he would sometimes look at his phone and smile, a different smile than the one he showed me. The careful way he guarded his laptop. The sudden interest in his appearance, new clothes, more time spent grooming. The signs were all there, I just hadn't let myself see them. The next wife wasn't a hypothetical, she was real. And she had been for a while. The silence stretched, growing heavier with each passing hour. We were living parallel lives in the same house, two strangers sharing a roof, connected only by the shattered remnants of a past we viewed very differently. My mind raced, trying to piece together the timeline. When did it start? How serious was it? Was he already planning the logistics of leaving? Was he just waiting for the right moment, the moment that would be most convenient for him? The casual reference to me as first implied a certainty, a plan already in motion. The humiliation ate away at me. Not just the betrayal, but the public nature of it. The thought of who else might have heard him, who might have pitied me, who might have whispered about the poor wife who didn't know her marriage was over. It was a slow burn of shame and anger. I knew I couldn't live like this. The uncertainty was a poison. The silence was a cage. I had to confront him. I rehearsed the conversation in my head 100 times. What would I say? How would I stay calm? How would I react to his inevitable lies, his deflections, his justifications? I imagined him confessing, him apologizing, him begging me to understand. I imagined him being cold, denying it, turning it back on me. None of the scenarios felt right. None prepared me for the reality of facing the man who had just erased me from his future with 4 careless words. I decided I would do it that weekend. Sit him down, look him in the eye, and demand the truth. Demand an end to the charade. I spent Friday steeling myself, building up my courage like a fragile wall against the coming storm. I went through the motions of my day, my heart a lead weight in my chest, counting down the hours until I would face him. Saturday morning arrived, gray and overcast, mirroring my mood. He was downstairs, making coffee. The mundane sounds of our life, the clinking of mugs, the whir of the coffee grinder, felt surreal. I walked down, my legs heavy, my hands clammy. This was it. The moment of truth. The moment I would shatter the fragile peace we'd been living in and step into the unknown. I sat at the kitchen table, watching him. He avoided my eyes, poured his coffee, added milk, stirred it slowly. The tension in the room was suffocating. I opened my mouth to speak, the carefully chosen words ready on my tongue. And then his phone rang. It was an insistent, jarring ring that cut through the tense silence. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting from guarded neutrality to annoyance. He swiped to answer, his voice low and clipped. Yeah? What is it? He listened, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. His free hand gripped the edge of the counter. The color drained from his face. He said nothing, just listened, his knuckles turning white. I watched him, a strange mix of dread and morbid curiosity churning within me. Who was on the other end? Was it her? Was he getting a progress report on his plan to discard me? His breathing grew shallow. He closed his eyes for a moment, a pained grimace contorting his features. What? He finally choked out, his voice barely a whisper.
No.
That's impossible. More listening. The silence in the room stretched taut, vibrating with his rising panic. He started to tremble. The coffee cup in his hand rattled against the saucer. When he asked, his voice hoarse.
How?
How could that happen? He listened again, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it, something he never did. He looked utterly blindsided. Okay, he finally said, the word hollow.
Okay.
I'll call you back. He ended the call, his hand shaking as he set the phone down on the counter. He stood there, rooted to the spot, staring into space, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. I watched him, silent. The confrontation I had planned was forgotten, swept away by this sudden, unexpected wave of panic emanating from him. What could possibly have shaken him like this? He finally turned, his eyes vacant, unfocused. He looked through me, not at me. His lips moved, but no sound came out. What happened? I asked, my voice quiet, cutting through the stunned silence. He blinked, as if seeing me for the first time. His eyes finally focused, but they were filled with a raw, animal fear I had never seen before. It's Amy, he stammered, naming the woman I knew, intellectually, was the next wife. I didn't know her name for sure, but I knew of her existence, the constant presence in his late nights and canceled plans. Hearing her name, spoken in that tone of absolute horror, sent a jolt through me. What about her? I asked, my voice steady despite the sudden surge of adrenaline. He swallowed hard. She was arrested. Arrested? My mind raced. For what? Drunk driving? Shoplifting? Something minor? But his reaction wasn't minor. This was pure, unadulterated terror. Arrested for what? I pressed, leaning forward slightly. He hesitated, his gaze darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. Fraud, he whispered, the word barely audible. Massive fraud. Federal charges. They raided her office this morning. Fraud. Massive fraud. Federal charges. The words hit me like physical blows. Amy, the next wife, arrested for massive federal fraud. On the same weekend, he planned to... What? Leave me? Announce his intentions? The universe, it seemed, had a dark sense of humor. He started pacing, running his hands through his hair again, muttering to himself. Raided. Accounts frozen. They think she's been doing it for years. Hiding assets. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to himself, his world collapsing around him. The charming, confident man from the wedding, the man who casually discarded his wife, was gone, replaced by a frantic, terrified stranger. As he paced, babbling about frozen accounts and federal agents, a strange calm settled over me. The despair, the humiliation, the grief, they didn't vanish, but they were momentarily eclipsed by a new, cold clarity. This wasn't about me anymore. Not directly. This was about him and his next wife. His perfect future, built on someone else's instability, was imploding. He stopped pacing suddenly, his eyes fixed on me, a desperate, pleading look in them. They're saying it could be tens of millions, he whispered, as if the number itself was toxic. Her assets. Her company. It's all gone. Under investigation. He was visibly shaking now. This is a disaster. Understatement of the year. For him, at least. For me. I was still processing. The woman he was planning to leave me for was a fraudster, facing federal charges. Her life, and presumably his future with her, was in ruins. He continued to spiral, his fear turning into frantic strategizing. If her accounts are frozen, how will she pay for lawyers? They'll seize everything. Everything. His voice rose, bordering on hysterical. He wasn't worried about her. He was worried about the financial implications for him. Had he given her money? Invested with her? Was he somehow implicated? He finally looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in days. The fear in his eyes morphed into something else. Calculation, mixed with a desperate, fragile hope. He saw me not as the woman he was leaving, but as a potential lifeline. We need to figure this out, he said, his voice trembling. This changes things. Everything changes. Changes things? Yes, it certainly did. His plan to smoothly transition from first wife to current wife of a wealthy woman, I presumed, was shattered. The foundation of his new life was built on sand, and the tide had just come in with a vengeance. He started talking faster, throwing out possibilities. Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe her lawyers can fix it. It can't be that bad, can it? His words lacked conviction. He knew it was bad. His terror was palpable. He kept talking, rambling about legal fees, asset forfeiture, the potential length of a federal investigation. He paced again, a caged animal. He wasn't seeing me. He was seeing the future he'd envisioned disappearing before his eyes. The woman who was supposed to be his upgrade, his ticket to a different league, was instead an anchor dragging him towards disaster. And I sat there, watching. The shock was starting to wear off, replaced by a slow, dawning realization. His cruelty at the wedding, his casual dismissal of our life together, had been based on the assumption that he had a better option waiting. He was ready to discard me because he thought he had found something bigger, better, more aligned with his ambition. But he was wrong. Spectacularly wrong. The woman he had chosen was not a solid foundation for his future, but a sinkhole. Her downfall wasn't just hers. It was inextricably linked to him. The next wife was now a liability, a scandal, potentially a financial and legal black hole. He stopped pacing again, turning to me, his eyes wide and pleading. Look, he said, his voice softer now, trying to sound reasonable, trying to recapture some semblance of control. About what I said at the wedding. He trailed off, searching my face. Did he think he could just apologize? Smooth it over? Pretend he hadn't meant it, now that his escape route was blocked? A cold, quiet strength began to settle within me. The fear and hurt were still there, but they were now overlaid with something else. Power. He was terrified. He was exposed. His carefully laid plans were in ruins, and I was the only constant left in his suddenly chaotic world. He had seen me as disposable, as merely the first wife, but in this moment, his moment of crisis, I was the one with stability, with a life that wasn't currently under federal investigation. He took a step towards me, reaching out a hand as if to touch my arm. I flinched back, subtly, instinctively. The movement was small, but it stopped him cold. He saw it. He saw the barrier I had erected, the distance he had created, and that I was now choosing to maintain. We need to talk, he said, his voice urgent. About this. About everything. Yes, I agreed, my voice calm level. Surprisingly calm. We do. But it wouldn't be the conversation I had planned. It wouldn't be me demanding answers, begging for explanations, trying to understand his betrayal. It would be different. He was the one exposed now, not me. He was the one vulnerable, not me. My despair hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. The crushing weight of his betrayal was still heavy, but it was now mixed with a strange, almost intoxicating sense of vindication. Not because I wished ill on another woman, but because his cruelty, his arrogance, his casual dismissal of me had backfired so spectacularly, so immediately. He had been so sure of his position, so confident in his upgrade, that he felt comfortable humiliating me publicly. And the universe had delivered a swift, brutal reality check. I looked at him, really looked at the man who had been my husband for 7 years. The panic was still there, etched on his face, but beneath it, I saw the same calculating ambition that had driven him, the same self-interest. He wasn't panicking because he cared about Amy. He was panicking because her disaster was his disaster. His carefully constructed future, the one that didn't include me, was gone, and he needed a new plan. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that his new plan would involve trying to salvage what he could and, potentially, trying to use me to do it. He would try to backtrack, to minimize what he'd said, to paint himself as a victim of circumstance. He would try to find a way to make my continued presence beneficial to him in the face of his crisis. But I wasn't the same woman he had dismissed at the wedding. In the silence, in the tears, in the shock of the last few days, and now in the face of his panic, something had shifted inside me. The first wife was gone, replaced by someone colder, clearer, and infinitely more determined. My decision was made in that instant. This wasn't about forgiveness, or reconciliation, or even just walking away quietly. This was about securing my future. This was about ensuring that his casual cruelty at the wedding, his assumption that he could just trade me in, would cost him
dearly.
"Sit down," I said, my voice quiet but firm. He blinked, surprised by my tone. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly sank into a chair at the table. He looked utterly defeated, stripped of his usual composure. "Now," I continued, folding my hands on the table, looking him directly in the eye. "Let's talk about the first wife." The confrontation wasn't loud. It wasn't a screaming match filled with accusations and tears. It was quiet, almost clinical. He tried to explain, to backtrack, to minimize. "Look, about the wedding. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking." I cut him off calmly. "You meant it. You looked right at me after you said it. You meant for me to hear it. You had a plan. And that plan involved leaving me for Amy." He flinched at her name. It's not that simple." "Oh, I think it is," I said, a hint of dry humor entering my voice, a defense mechanism surfacing. "You thought you had an upgrade waiting. A better model. Just the first wife. Like I was a starter car you were trading in." He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. The silence hung heavy again, but this time it was my silence, filled with my thoughts, my resolve. "So," I continued, "it seems your upgrade is undergoing unexpected maintenance. A rather serious recall, in fact." He winced. I knew I was being cold, perhaps even cruel, but years of stifled hurt and the shock of his casual betrayal had hardened me. This was the dry humor, the dark irony of the situation, spilling out. "This changes things," he repeated, desperate. "Amy's situation. It's complicated. Financially." "I'm sure it is," I agreed. "Federal fraud tends to be complicated. It means my options. They're not what I thought they were." He was circling, trying to find a way to express what he wanted without saying it outright. Was he hoping I'd suddenly be appealing again, now that the alternative was gone? Did he think I'd feel sorry for him? "Your options?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Your option was to discard me. To walk away when it was convenient for you, for someone you clearly believed was a better prospect. You made that clear at the wedding." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "But with Amy, all of her assets are frozen. She has nothing. Her company is gone. The lawyers. It's going to cost millions just to fight this. And he trailed off, clearly realizing he was confirming his mercenary motives. "And you were planning to rely on her resources," I finished for him, my voice flat. "To build your new life on the back of her enterprise." He didn't deny it. He couldn't. His silence was confirmation. "So," I said, pushing back from the table, standing up. I walked to the window, looked out at the gray day. "Here's how this is going to go." I turned back to face him. His face was pale, his eyes wide with apprehension.
He saw the change in me. The fear was gone.
The indecision was gone. I was no longer the first wife, waiting to be replaced. I was the woman who held the cards. Or at least, the woman whose hand hadn't been annihilated by federal agents that morning. "You want it out," I stated simply.
"Fine.
We'll get divorced." A flicker of relief crossed his face, quickly replaced by renewed fear as I continued. "But it's going to be on my terms. You wanted to trade up. You wanted a clean break, presumably taking whatever you could with you, leaving me behind with a pat on the head and a thanks for your service. Well, life doesn't always work out the way you plan. I walked back to the table, leaning on it slightly, looking down at him. Considering your associate's current predicament and the potential financial fallout for you, I think my terms are going to be very reasonable. For me, at least. His eyes narrowed. What terms? Everything, I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. The house. The majority of the savings. A significant portion of your investments. Alimony, for a reasonable period. He stared at me, stunned. Everything? You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, I said, the steel in my voice unmistakable. You wanted to leave me for someone else, someone with what you clearly thought were superior resources. That plan failed.
Catastrophically.
Now you're facing potential financial ruin because of her. You're desperate. You need a clean break from this mess, and I represent that. I represent stability. A way out. A way to salvage something. He scoffed, trying to regain some of his former arrogance. You think you can just take everything? I think, I said, meeting his gaze steadily, that you are in an extremely vulnerable position right now. Your judgment led you into a relationship with a woman facing federal fraud charges. Your plans relied on her illegally obtained wealth. Your reputation is about to take a massive hit when this becomes public. You need this divorce to be quick, quiet, and undisputed. You need to cut ties cleanly before her mess drags you down further. And I am the person who can ensure that happens.
Or
I can make it very, very messy. I can ensure that the details of your relationship with a federal suspect and your plans to leave your wife for her become very public knowledge. Think about your career. Your reputation. He paled again. That hit home. His reputation, his standing in his ambitious world, meant everything to him. Being associated with a massive fraud case, especially one where he was planning to benefit from the relationship, would be devastating. You wouldn't, he whispered. Try me, I said, my voice low. You called me just the first wife at a public event. You thought you were so clever, so secure in your next step that you could treat me with such casual disrespect. You underestimated me. You underestimated life. Now you're going to pay for that mistake. He looked at me, truly defeated. The power dynamic had completely shifted. He had tried to leave me from a position of perceived strength for a better option. Now, his better option was a disaster, and I was the one in a position of strength, holding the leverage. His desperation, his fear of public scandal and financial ruin tied to Amy's fraud, made him pliable. I'll have my lawyer contact you, I said, pushing off the table, my voice regaining a note of finality. You'll agree to my terms. You want out? This is the price. Consider it a severance package for the first wife. I walked away then, leaving him sitting at the table, staring blankly ahead, the weight of his ruined plans and impending losses pressing down on him. The silence in the house was still heavy, but it felt different now. It wasn't a silence of despair, but a silence of quiet, cold victory. The divorce was swift. He didn't fight my terms. His lawyer, a slick, nervous man, informed my lawyer that his client was eager to settle quickly and quietly due to unforeseen circumstances. The details of Amy's fraud case were splashed across the news shortly after. The scale of it was staggering. Millions, possibly billions, laundered through complex schemes. The potential connection to my husband, implied by his association with her, was enough to make him want to disappear from the public eye. He signed over the house, the bulk of the assets, agreed to the alimony. He was eager to sever all ties, to erase any trace of the past few months that might connect him to the unfolding scandal. He lost everything he had built with me, and the future he had planned with her had vanished into thin air, replaced by legal battles and public shame. The irony was palpable. He had wanted to leave me for a life of greater wealth and status, only to lose his current wealth and any hope of future status due to the person he chose. There was no grand celebration on my part. No dancing on his grave. Just a quiet, profound sense of relief mixed with the lingering ache of betrayal. The house felt different after he was gone. Lighter, cleaner. It was no longer a place of silent tension and unspoken goodbyes. It was mine. I changed the locks, repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture. Each small act was a reclamation, a rebuilding. I started going out with friends again, taking up old hobbies, trying new things. It wasn't an overnight transformation. There were still moments of sadness, moments of anger, moments when the casual cruelty of his words echoed in my mind. The scar was there, a reminder of how easily someone you love can shatter your world. But the despair was gone, replaced by resilience. His attempt to discard me had, ironically, set me free and left me in a position of unexpected security, thanks to his next wife's spectacular downfall. I wasn't the victim he thought he could leave behind. I was the one who emerged from the wreckage with her future intact, while his lay in ruins. I sometimes wonder what happened to him. I saw news reports about Amy's trial, the lengthy sentence she received. His name was mentioned in some articles, a footnote about his association with her company, but nothing more. He seemed to have successfully dodged any direct legal repercussions, but the financial hit and the damage to his reputation were undeniable. He vanished from my life, the man who was my husband, then the man who casually dismissed me, finally the man who lost everything because of his own ambition and poor judgment. Sitting in my living room now, the sun streaming through the windows, I feel a sense of peace I hadn't realized was missing for years. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine. Built by me, for me. There's a quiet strength in knowing I survived not just the betrayal, but the chaos that followed. He thought I was just the first wife. But I was the last obstacle to his failed plan and the quiet beneficiary of his spectacular downfall. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear a version in the comments below. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.